Hello, I'm Sheila Averbuck for the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. Thank you so much for joining us for our first of our Spotlight interviews. I am thrilled to see you joining us this evening from wherever you are tuning in from. Let us know in the comments where you are joining us from. Joining us from Australia is Steven Conte. He is the author of The Tolstoy Estate, which has just been shortlisted for this year's prize. Steven is the author also of The Zookeeper's War, which won the prestigious Prime Minister's Literary Award. And he is here to talk to us this evening about his book, The Tolstoy Estate. Steven, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Sheila, for having me.
How did it feel when you heard that The Tolstoy Estate had been shortlisted for the Walter Scott Prize?
It was an extraordinary thrill and boost. It also was a bolt from the blue in the sense that my book not having been published in the UK, I had no idea it was even eligible. So that was an extraordinary, fabulous discovery, and hoping that it will boost the chances of publication in the UK and hopefully the US as well.
For people who aren't familiar with the book, could you give us a very brief description of what happens?
So the Tolstoy Estate, the hero is a German military surgeon. It's set in the Second World War, Paul Bauer, and Bauer is part of the occupying force that sets up a field hospital at the former estate Yasnaya Polyana of Leo Tolstoy to the southwest of Moscow. And it's there that he encounters the head custodian of the estate, Katerina Trubetskaya, who proceeds to give the Germans hell while treading a fine line between having herself sent away or shot. So that's the essential crucible in which I've put the characters.
And this actually happened. The German invading army did take over Leo Tolstoy's home and estate. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it was only for a brief period, 6 weeks at the end of in November and December of 1941. Any people who are familiar with the ebb and flow of the Second World War will know that the Germans were initially pushed back and that then they came back again the following summer, but they never recaptured Yasnaya Polyana or approached the city of Tula, which is nearby, where the main battlefront is happening during the course of the novel. 15 kilometers away, this intense fight for the city of Tula is going on.
So how did the events at the center of the novel first come to you as a concept? Were you aware that Tolstoy's estate had been occupied during World War II?
Utterly unaware. I came across the story in a wonderful book called Journey Among Warriors, and by Eva Curie. So Curie was the daughter of Marie Curie, the discoverer of radium and dual Nobel Prize winner. So she was already famous as her mother's biographer, but as a relatively young woman, late 30s, she was given an assignment by Time magazine to tour the war and had an extraordinary series of adventures. It's a potential novel or biography in itself, although in a sense she's written her own story. But she ended up on the Russian front and visiting Tolstoy's estate only 2 weeks after it had been liberated from the Germans. And she described in interviews, she was able to interview the local custodians and described the way in which the Germans that were there, the medical personnel had been relatively decent in their behavior. But this awareness that everyone there had, the locals and the Germans alike, that they were in a place of great cultural and ideological significance, Tolstoy being this national writer of this national epic of resistance to a foreign invader. And so everyone was there acutely aware of this presence of the giant author above them. And of course, I was immediately hooked with that setting, having a tight setting that contained the action.
The way that you have got characters in the book reading War and Peace while there is a live war going on very close to them and feeding in casualties, it's fascinating. As someone who loves books, anyone who loves literature is going to love the fact that War and Peace is so consciously referred to by the characters. They're discussing Napoleon versus Hitler. And there's this, so you have the two people, Katerina and Paul, who are both both love Tolstoy, yet they're quite hostile to each other, especially Katerina. Does Katerina not headbutt Paul at one stage, or am I remembering that correctly?
You're remembering that correctly. It's a reverse Glaswegian kiss with the back of the head. So yeah, I definitely wanted to have my heroine to be fiery and aggressive and resisting by whatever means possible these interlopers.
But you get the sense that these two characters, they're dying to discuss literature with somebody, and nobody else, is the least bit interested. You've got the other people taking care of Tolstoy's estate and the running of it, but these are the only two characters who want to talk books and want to talk literature. And there is a lot of talk about the role of literature and the value of books within the book. Is that something that you enjoyed exploring as a writer yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was something that I had to give myself permission to do. I think there is, if you were to go to certainly a mid-20th century writing course or writing manual, there's a sense in which you can't have talking heads. And I certainly hope that that's not what the effect that I've achieved here. But I was encouraged to have characters who care about ideas and talk about books. As you say, because I love books, but also I think it's true to life. It is a difficult thing to portray in fiction, but nevertheless, it is true to life. All around us, if you come from a certain sort of milieu, people talk about ideas. And so to me, the challenge was to make that not like talking heads, to make that engaging, plausible, that at the same time, I'm very much a writer who likes to describe what it is to be embodied, whether it's the reverse Glaswegian kiss, that this is not just a novel of ideas, it's a novel where the characters are feeling the sting of the sleet on their faces and so on, and to actually combine what is for many of us the whole of life.
What do you think it is about World War II that makes it such an enduring fascination for historians and also authors and readers? World War II fiction and history, it's just endlessly fascinating. Is it because it was just so awful?
Oddly enough, I don't think that's the reason. At the risk of being flippant initially, I think it's the fabulous settings, the fabulous scenery is part of it. I mean, the World War I was awful enough for any millennia. And yet there's relatively few novels of that war. I mean, some terrific ones, of course, the Ghost Road trilogy. But I think part of the attraction for literary writers and also commercial writers of commercial fiction is these amazing, you've got the Pacific Islands, you've got the Arctic tundra, you have the mid-Atlantic, you have the African desert, you have the Papua New Guinean jungles. It just goes on and on, from a sort of a scenery scout. It's just superb. And within that too, it's a mobile war in which ordinary people did get to travel the world and, as the old joke goes, kill people. But it was a war in which people had these epic experiences, ordinary people, and rather than, in the case of the First World War, these narrow band of young men just stuck in the mud in the most literal sense. So I think it's that it's some level, despite all the manifold horrors, there was, I think, some comfort. There's some relief for the reader in the sense that the characters are able to move. They have some scope for action, and that's part of the appeal. Plus, this sense it's our Homeric era, that it's a time when there appeared to at least be some sort of moral clarity, that the evildoers were obviously evil, and it gives certainly readers from allied nations that kind of sense of a time. The Americans refer to the people who fought the war as the greatest generation.
We have a few viewers checking in here. Hello, John. Thank you for coming to see us tonight. If any of you watching have questions for Steven, by all means, put them in the comments. We'll put them to Steven. Steven, let me ask you, would you like to do a reading now? Have you chosen a bit?
Absolutely. I have indeed.
I'm going to give you the stage, and when you have it, you can read away. I'll let you go ahead and do that now.
Sure. So this is just a short reading, just a minute or so. It describes Paul sitting in the upper story of the Tolstoy house where he is billeted, waiting around with sudden interest for the arrival of Katerina, who he has begun to feel warmly towards. The casualty rate continued to be manageable, and because the following day it was Metz's turn to do surgery, Bauer lingered at the main house in the hope of seeing Katerina Dmitrievna. Outside there was another gale blowing, making it possible she wouldn't come, but after writing letters in his room for half an hour, he was rewarded by the sight of her coming up the drive, accompanied by the head housekeeper, a woman of similar height but much larger girth. The wind was at the women's backs, bullying them forward, forcing Katerina to keep braking with short, jarring steps. A coil of her auburn hair, escaped from her Ushanka, was frantically whipping her face. Quickly, Bauer put away his notes, tucked the estate's German copy of War and Peace into his greatcoat, and went downstairs, arriving in the vestibule just as the women opened the door. With them came a blast of wind, causing the tasseled floor runner to rear like a snake and strike at their knees. Bauer sprang forward and stomped on its neck, then shouldered the door shut behind them. Katerina was laughing, not in the sardonic way he'd become used to, but joyfully without reserve. Her hat and her coat were spangled with ice. "It's freezing out there," she cried in Russian. "Even for me it's freezing. Much more of this, and I'll have to start pitying you." So thanks.
I love that. I love that Katerina isn't the least bit welcoming, and she seems almost reckless in her defiance of these Germans. She could get shot at any second, and she tells them the minute she sees them, and whenever she gets the chance, you know you're going to lose. You know you're going to lose. You cannot possibly win. I'm afraid for her, reading that something awful is going to happen, that she's going to get shot any minute, but it doesn't happen. Why doesn't it happen? Why don't they just dispatch her?
I think that to describe her state of mind initially, she's in a very reckless state of mind, because she's actually, giving the Germans hell, and yet a lot of it is a displaced fury at her own regime. She's 39 at the time of the novel's action, and is experienced that midlife disappointment of having been a passionate young communist and revolutionary and idealist, and living this extraordinary revolutionary tumult in Moscow in the early part of the revolution, the early 20s, and then to see the promise of that time eradicated by Stalinism. So in a sense, when the Germans arrive, she's primed. She would have been open to the idea of the regime, her own regime, being overthrown. But of course, then these horrific racists and anti-Semites arrive. And so she has sort of a double fury. I think she's coming up against these medical officers is one part of the action. They're not ruthless killers. But it's also that I think that she's operating with a type of force field around her of righteous rage. Now, it's going to be up to the reader whether they find that plausible or not. But I have observed in life, the people who carry this sort of sense of confidence with them or something. I have a friend who seemed to be being mugged, but just politely provided her mugger with some coinage and so on, and she went to so much trouble that he ended up being bashful and sheepish about it. So look, it's up to the reader to decide whether they find that that strength of personality, and also she's useful. The Germans have a field hospital to run. And there they already have an existing estate staff, albeit a skeleton staff. So that's Katerina.
I was very interested as a writer myself to see what I thought you had taken as a big plot risk right in the middle of the book. In fact, right after, I think she headbutts Steven. Paul, no, not Steven. You're Steven. Paul. Suddenly it's 25 years later and they're corresponding, I don't know if this letter is going to find you. And I thought, whoa, that is a risk, because there's a risk that the plot could lose all momentum, but it doesn't. It really works because it only heightens the intrigue of, well, what did happen in the rest of their time together? What more don't I know? And there are a few references to, the boy you killed and things like that we haven't seen yet. As a writer, talk about that risk you took in the plot. Did you think it was risky to do that right in the middle?
Oh, absolutely a risk. Every structural choice you make there's a cost benefit analysis that you put in play. You lose something, you gain something, and readers, I think typically, they enjoy being immersed in a story. They get used to the flow of the direction of the story, and it is a wrench. It's a problem in big sprawling novels like War and Peace, when you're perhaps completely enjoying one character and then you've got a different viewpoint character. This isn't that. It's wrenching in time and space, and I wanted to. I was willing to make the sacrifice of the disruption because of what you mentioned, the potentials for suspense. And there's a sort of a misunderstanding that suspense is about mystery, but it's absolutely not. It's about the sort of trailing of information like a matador's cape. And so you actually need to inform the reader of certain things that are going to happen in order for them to feel suspenseful about them. Or how is that accomplished, or what precisely and is going to happen. And as you say, at one stage, Katerina says, "Oh, those colleagues of yours who died, I can't remember their names." So you're immediately
colleagues plural. Colleagues plural. Yeah. Oh, has anyone died yet? Oh, keep reading. What fascinated me, again, reading it, and we've got a comment here from a viewer saying that they thanks for humanizing the German doctor's character. He is quite a complete human, isn't he? He's not just a bad German soldier puppet. He's I remember at one stage he's conducting surgery, and he reminds himself that the people he's operating on are people. Loves or is loved. This person loves or is loved by someone, and I don't think I've seen that in the page before. This 360-degree character of someone from the German army.
I think it's the German officer, of course, is a figure from stereotype that from countless B grade or A grade war movies, and so it was certainly daunting to embark on that. And it was my aim. It's my interest. In looking at the moral complexity of those who fought on the Axis side, and as you say, to humanize them without excusing them. I mean, Bauer's comrades, some of them, even the likable ones, are casually anti-Semitic. I try to not whitewash the situation. Bauer himself is when he was given the opportunity to vote, and was a social democrat, and I think that is absolutely plausible. A large proportion of the population would be similar today. The people who are ardently progressive in our societies are probably like a figure 15% of the population, and I don't think that changed just because people were enlisted in the German military or on the home front. There would have been this core of people who absolutely detested Hitler. In fact, we can read their memoirs to this day.
The character of Metz, the commanding officer over Bauer and all the others, was fascinating to me. The way you layer character upon character upon character, every character jumps off the page. But Metz in particular is fascinating because very early in the story, someone talks about the ghost of Leo Tolstoy, and Metz becomes obsessed with this idea, doesn't he? Possibly because of the amphetamines he's injecting, but also tell me about how it was to write Metz as a character. Did you enjoy that character?
Yeah, it's terrific to have characters who are, well, disinhibited. There's another comrade, Molyneux, the anaesthetist, who's absolutely someone who will say anything, and that's terrifically liberating. And Metz is a grotesque at some level, although like Bauer, I wanted Metz to be comprehensible and to some extent rounded. But he is a terrifically sharply delineated type with all sorts of interesting quirks and so on. And once again, I was operating in the territory of of potential stereotype, that there are parts of Metz that are Colonel Klink from Hogan's Heroes, but I've been made certain to give him some depth, understanding, even into his marriage, and to not make him uniformly wicked, because he certainly is not uniformly wicked. He's a fine surgeon, for example, and I wanted him to be a proper human being, but a riveting one.
As you know, the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction is named for the founding father of the historical novel, Walter Scott. We celebrate the 250th year of his anniversary of his birth this year. You were telling me before that Walter Scott has a certain resonance for you as a writer and as your development as a writer. Tell me a bit about that.
So, explaining how, as an 11-year-old, would you believe, I had a terrifically traditional, old-fashioned and inspiring class teacher who got us to learn by heart Lochinvar by Walter Scott. Lochinvar's Scott's a sort of heroic poem. And it was, absolutely formative in my understanding myself as in my relationship with words, because as it turned out, I was the only child in the class who did ultimately manage to learn and recite the entire poem. And so, there's that sort of sense I was being challenged and stimulated to be someone who was good with words. And it's that, fortunate enough to have that early encouragement.
Do you think we could persuade you to read a little bit, or even recite, if you can remember any of Lochinvar?
I can actually recite the first few stanzas. I could probably have a crack at the whole thing, but I thought that, I'll give a crack at the initial stanzas, and perhaps I'll do some reading as well. So I'll stand by, everyone. I think it's about 3 minutes. So I should give a little bit of an explanation. Lochinvar is a young knight, and this is his heroic efforts to win the fair Ellen, who's been promised to another. O young Lochinvar is come out of the west, through all the wide borders his steed was the best, and save his good broadsword he weapons had none. He rode all alone, he rode all unarmed, so faithful in love and so dauntless in war, there never was knight like the young Lochinvar. He stayed not for wake, he stopped not for stone, he swam the Esk river where ford there was none, but ere he alighted at Netherby gate, the bride had consented, the gallant came late. For a laggard in love and a dastard in war was to wed the fair Ellen of the brave Lochinvar. So boldly he entered the Netherby hall, mongst bridesmen and kinsmen and brothers and all. Then out spake the bride's father, his hand on his sword, for the poor craven bridegroom said never a word. O come ye in peace here, or come ye in war, or to dance at our bridal, young Lord Lochinvar? I long wooed your daughter, my suit you denied. Love swells like the Solway, but ebbs like its tide. And now I'm come with this lost love of mine, to lead but one measure, drink one cup of wine. There are maidens in Scotland more lovely by far, that would gladly be bride to the young Lochinvar. The bride kissed the goblet, the knight took it up. He quaffed off the wine and he threw down the cup. She looked down to blush, and she looked up to sigh, with a smile on her lips and a tear in her eye. He took her soft hand ere her mother could bar. Now tread we a measure, quoth young Lochinvar. So stately his form and so lovely her face, that never a hall such a galliard did grace. While her mother did fret and her father did fume, and the bridegroom stood dangling his bonnet and plume, and the bridesmaidens whispered, 'Twere better by far to have wed our fair cousin with young Lochinvar. One touch to her hand and one word in her ear, when they reached the hall door and the charger stood near. So light to the croup the fair lady he swung, so light to the saddle before her he sprung. She is won, we are gone over bank, bush and scaur. They'll have fleet steeds that follow, quoth young Lochinvar. There was mounting Mungraves of the Netherby clan, Fosters, Fenwicks and Musgraves, they rode and they ran. There was racing and chasing on Canopy Lee, but the lost bride of Netherby ne'er did they see. So daring in love and so dauntless in war, have ye e'er heard of a gallant like young Lochinvar?
It was fantastic. I can picture 11-year-old Steven standing up and impressing the heck out of his teacher. Did that teacher make quite an impression on you?
Oh, absolutely. There's actually an extraordinary story about Mrs. Cook. To this day, I'll probably have to unearth her first name one day. I certainly never knew it or had forgotten it. But a friend of mine subsequently worked in some aged care in the local town. And unfortunately, in her old age, Mrs. Cook developed dementia. And the striking, the extraordinary story is that he found her one day storing her books in the freezer of the refrigerator. And I thought, oh, how evocative of somebody who's lost almost everything but still wants to preserve somehow the written word. So yes, she was an absolutely, a cornerstone. And that particular day, I will now remember today for the rest of my life, because you've asked me to recapitulate an experience that was, so formative.
We have a Young Walter Scott Prize, which elevates and celebrates writers age 11 to 19 who want to try their hand at historical fiction. So I'm always interested to speak to writers like yourself and see, do you have any specific advice for young writers who want to write historical?
Well, there's a sort of broad advice. I guess if a writer's attracted to an era or a subject or the desire to write historical fiction, they're probably going to have the hurdle requirement of the passion for that period. On a potentially sort of narrower technical point, one of the things that's essential in all fiction is to make it plausible. Why is your character observing their environment? There's a sort of a technical issue of, if it's an environment that they're fully familiar with, then things that might seem picturesque to us won't seem picturesque to them, and so it's no good having a viewpoint character who's going away saying, there is London Bridge where commerce is conducted between the hours of so and so and so and so. It's necessary to find a way for the character to observe plausibly what's going on around them and inform us. And I think it often helps to have an outsider, and especially an informed outsider who's both deeply familiar with the world but has a reason, in a sense, to have an internal monologue with themselves about what they're seeing. So it would be that how to incorporate, which in a sense is to say, how do you incorporate research in a way that doesn't feel researched?
Interesting. We have a lot of young writers who go in for the Young Walter Scott Prize who are history is their favorite subject. They do English anyway, but they're not necessarily want to be writers, but they're thrilled by the history. That's excellent. Thank you very much for that. Steven, I should ask you as well, where can people find out more about your writing if they want to get the latest, including when the book may be available in the UK and the US? So
the best thing is to go to my website, which is just stevenconte.com. There we go. So as for availability in the US and the UK, unfortunately, the book is not yet released there, which is, of course, incredibly frustrating. There are negotiations underway. I'm not sure yet whether they will bear fruit. So if you happen to want to pressure your bookshops to in turn pressure publishers, that would be terrific. So it's a watching brief. The publishing industry, in a sense, is a bit old-fashioned. Everything's so global now. It might be technically possible. In fact, in due course, if the book is not published, it will be dumped by my Australian publisher. But that's a desperate measure at any time, because without any local supervision, a book can disappear unreviewed and go straight to the remainder tables. So yes, naturally, I'd love you to have the books at your fingertips in those other nations, but you may have to wait.
But you'll put news on your website when you have news, or indeed, isn't there a reading guide on your website as well for the Tolstoy Estate and the Zookeeper's War?
Yeah, sort of suggestions of questions for book groups and the like. So there's a variety of information there.
That's super. Steven, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and you're an absolute champion to read Lochinvar as well from memory from all those years ago. We were so happy to hear the story behind the story of the Tolstoy estate, and thank all you who tuned in. If you enjoyed these live author interviews, the next episode is going to be on the 11th of April at 11 a.m. That's a Sunday, UK time, and we're going to be speaking to Kate Grenville. She is the author of A Room Made of Leaves. And if you want to tune into that, we will put that on our social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel if you like. And we hope to see you there. Thank you again, Steven, for joining us. And thank all of you viewers who tuned in. And happy reading.
Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you, Steven.